All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I have 2 o'clock Central, 3 o'clock Eastern on my watch here. Hope everybody's doing good. Just want to do a quick video check and mic check. What you should see on your screen right now is a slide that says giving with a picture of my friend Chris's book, The Habit of Asking, and then you should hear me. So if that is indeed the case, we'd love for you to type that in the chat. And a great way to do it is just say, okay, sounds good, looks good. But also go ahead and type in where you're listening from and watching from today. So would love to just see that and make sure that all of the technology is working. I'm always moderately surprised when this stuff works, which I probably shouldn't be, but it's always good. So David from Colorado, welcome. Glad you're here, David. Lufkin, Texas is here. Robert, welcome. Glad you're here. Heidi, hello. Fantastic. Looks like people are here. We got Eric from South Carolina, Western Nebraska, Cincinnati representing today. Good. Alatoona, PA, Wisconsin, and Green Bay, Wisconsin. We're doing this webinar live from Minneapolis, Minnesota. So hopefully that's okay with you, Jim. Great. So it looks like everybody's logging in. So I want to go ahead and get started. Feel free to chat throughout during the day. I want to give you a few logistics, and then we're going to kind of dive in to what we're talking about today. So this is the second in a series of webinars that we're doing around what we call the 3 key actions. I'll talk about those in just a minute. Today we're going to kind of talk about the key action of giving, because every pastor I've interacted with would love their people to give so the church can keep ministering and doing things. And so we're going to talk about that today. We've got the slide deck for you, the replay link for you, as well as a copy of this book that you see on the screen. All those is kind of follow-up resources for you today. And you can get those by texting the word give to this phone number that's on your screen right now. So after the webinar's over, we're going to send, when you text give to that, then we'll text you back, you'll reply with your email address. And then to that email address, we will send that book, a copy of these slides, the replay link, basically all the stuff we talk about on the training today. You'll have that and be able to share it with others on your team or come back to it later. So I'll put this number up again at the end, but you probably want to go ahead and do that right now. Would be a great way to just make sure that you get these resources and get the replay link. Okay, so you can go ahead and do that, and that would be great. A couple other logistics throughout the day today. You can chat and ask any questions in the chat room. And so if you've got questions about the content, about anything that we talk about, or need something, some of our team is standing by in that chat room, and they'll be able to either answer those questions, and we'll do some at the end as well. So if you've got a question, go ahead and type it in. And if for some reason we run out of time and don't get to your question, we're saving all those questions, and we'll be able to respond back to you personally as well. So that's just a few housekeeping things. So the way I want to kind of frame up our conversation today is with this sentence. And we found this sentence to just really resonate with a lot of the pastors that we serve. And the sentence is this: your church isn't growing the way it should because your people aren't engaging the way you want. And so when we look at your church, look at churches across the country, and we work with churches really in every state, we see a lot of churches and a lot of pastors come to us and they say, our church is great. Like, we've got a good building, we've got our service is good. How come it's not growing? And when we dive underneath that, and we get under that and get into those things, it's common answer that we hear is that this engagement question. Our people just, they're not engaging the way that we kind of want them to engage with. And my friend Kerry Newhoff is a teaching pastor at his church, and a friend of mine. He says, if you want your church to grow, stop trying to attract people and start trying to engage people, which I thought it's just so insightful. Like the idea of engaging people, which is attractive to people. And so when we talk about this term engagement and why we're doing these webinars, it really has to do with this area is not just increasing church attendance, but to actually help people grow in their faith. Dave Adamson is another friend of mine. He is an online pastor at a church in my hometown of Atlanta. He says church attendance is not decreasing, it's decentralizing. And people still want to engage with their church, but they may not be there every Sunday. They're probably somewhere else. They may want to watch online. They may want to engage with people in a small group or in a home group or in a different way. And so when we talk about engaging, there's 4 things that we talk about, and we're doing webinars on each of these topics. And so pastors come to us and they say, we want our people to give, and that's what we're going to talk about today. They come and we say, hey, we want our people to serve. We talked about that on a training last week. They come and they say, hey, we want our people to invite. We're going to talk about that at next week's training. And then we want our people to grow in their faith. These are these 4 actions that pastors and church leaders want the people in their church to take. And that's how we talk about engagement. And so today, I think I'm really excited about our conversation today because I get to introduce you to Chris Kopka, who is a great friend of mine. We get to work together. He's the president of Thrivent Church Solutions Group. You may not know this, but Churchfield became a part of that group last year. And so we get to work together and talk about giving and talk about money and all kinds of fun stuff. And Chris and I are both sitting at the same computer right now. And he's going to guide our time today. And I'm super, super excited about it. And so, Chris, thanks for doing this.
Thanks for the opportunity, Michael, and for all the pastors online. It's a real honor and a privilege to be with you today.
You look a lot more scruffy in person than you do in this picture.
Yeah, this picture, for everybody who's seeing this picture, I'm rather hairless, and my wife used the adjective stark with respect to this picture.
Right.
And so I've grown a bit more hair out since this picture was taken.
That's good. I mean, both looks are okay. So
thanks for that.
Yeah. So Chris, I'm gonna kind of listen and follow along and kind of let you guide our discussion, and then just chime in from time to time. But for those of you who are watching and paying attention, you can follow along, take some notes. There's some really, really, really great and insightful stuff here. So let's dive in.
Well, one of the reasons why the title of my book is The Habit of Asking is the title of this book that Michael pulled in, and it's the idea of the power of habit. And we're going to dive into 5 insanely practical tips. I hope you'll find them to be insanely practical. But the idea of a habit is one of them, and something that's an implicit, insanely practical tip in the title of my book, The Habit of Asking, and then you see it here with the idea of the power of habit overall is, are you as a pastor in the habit of inviting people to give? The five practical steps that we're going to walk through today assume that you're in that habit, but if you're not, I encourage you to not only text in to receive a copy of my book, but also this is a really powerful book as well. And then that brings me to a conversation that Michael and I have had, and we started unpacking giving in the context of the pastor's job description. And we started role-playing together. Hey, these first 3 parts of a pastor's job description tend to look pretty good. Like, hey, job description bullet point number 1 is inviting people into a relationship with God. Well, that sounds pretty good. I think I want to apply for that. Job description point description. It's encouraging people to serve the world in some way, inspired by the modeling of God's Son, Jesus. Like, so far, this job description sounds super good. It tracks really well to the other 3 webinar series. I do this job. And then people take the job. And then there's this 4th job description bullet point that people forgot to read. And it's, hey, you also have to keep the lights on. You got to keep the lights on. And a phrase I've used with Michael, and when you and I first talked about this, it's got you chuckling, is like, I've worked now, and Michael's worked now with really hundreds and hundreds, we're getting into thousands and thousands of pastors. And I've yet to meet a single one who went into seminary or became a lay church planting leader because they had a freakish love for the offering plate. So, we know that to be true. And we know that this 4th bullet point in the job description, for very few of you on the phone, this is the reason you went into pastoring. For a couple of you on the webinar, it might be. This is where we see some people leave business and take those incredible skills, and they'll often come over into, say, an executive pastor role. And so for a few of you who are on this webinar, you might have said, well, that should have been the first bullet point on the job description. But our hunch is, for most of you, this doesn't resonate as the number 1 reason why you took the job. And so we hope you cultivate the habit of asking, and through the course of these hopefully insanely practical tips, you'll see that keeping the lights on is a part of your role, but giving definitely shows up in the other 3 parts of the job description as well, the parts of the job description that were most winsome to most of you. So let's pivot now into the first of the 5 insanely practical tips we want to offer to you. And that first one is that mindset matters more than money. Mindset matters more than money. And this can sound a little bit weird, actually, in the context of a giving webinar where you might think, well, almost all the content's probably going to focus on money. A lot of this content actually is going to focus on mindset, and we want to show you why. This next slide comes from research we've done here at Thrivent, and several amazing organizations, Churchview included, but also Barna and others, have helped us bring this information out into the broader church. On this first slide, what we're showing you are the correlations between income, money, and giving. And when we say giving, we don't mean solely financial giving. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see on the far left, you can assume a pretty low annual household income. On the far right, you can assume a pretty high household income. And then you see this pretty weird curve that for donation of money or goods and for volunteer hours per year, it's relatively low. It starts to go up, correlated pretty well with income, and then it comes back down. And that's a head scratcher, isn't it? Because shouldn't money mean more about giving than mindset? And from our research here, what we see if we look at correlations between mindset and giving, what is the heart saying? What's my head telling me to do? Not my wallet. What we see is that for people who have what we describe at Thrivent as a surplus mindset or surplus heart set in some respects, the correlation between giving as a percentage of household income and surplus mindset is incredibly high. What we see is a significant increase in times of volunteerism per month based upon mindset. And so oftentimes when we show these slides or this information to pastors, there's an oh wow moment, because the mindset of some of the givers in your church becomes a bit clearer. It helps explain that person that had so many of those visible trappings of wealth, and yet you feel like they're stingy. On the flip side, you have that surprise by the person who makes a really remarkable gift of time or money, but from the outside looking in, it didn't look like they had a whole lot of money, and maybe they don't have a whole lot of money, but what they have is a whole lot of heart. They've got a mindset of a giver, and a mindset can be cultivated and a mindset could be changed. Indeed, go ahead, Michael.
No, I was just saying, as you were talking, Chris, I was just thinking, like, we sometimes as pastors and church leaders go to work right on the money side of things. It's like, hey, giving's not good. Let's try to preach a better money sermon. And that doesn't always work. And what these slides are telling me and reinforcing to me is that no matter where our church is, no matter how well off our area is, that we have significant mindset work that we can do first. Because giving doesn't increase as people's wealth increases. Giving increases as their mindset changes.
Yeah.
And that's something we can all address regardless of what kind of church we're in.
Yeah. And all of a sudden, the other thing I've experienced, Michael, is when pastors see these slides, they realize, oh, wow. So this can help me understand how giving isn't just in that fourth bullet point of my job description of keeping the lights on. It absolutely shows up in the third bullet. Am I modeling the way Jesus would have me model? In the second bullet, am I growing my relationship with Jesus? In the first bullet, how do I grow in my love of God? So hopefully as you see these slides and you see how mindset truly matters more than money, we really hope that your own mindset starts to see giving in all parts of your job description, not just in that fourth part of the job description that you probably didn't read until after you took the job.
Right.
So in that spirit of, are there resources out there to help you? One of your reactions might be, okay, great. You gave me this whole mindset thing. What am I going to do about it? Another colleague of ours and a very dear friend of mine, Brad Hewitt, and his dear friend, Jim Oline, have written a book. It's called Your New Money Mindset. At the bottom of this screen, you'll also see a link. There's no cost for the New Money Mindset assessment that Thrivent has published. You're welcome to pull in that assessment. Try it for yourself. See what happens for you. You can certainly use it with your church as well. And this is actually one of the no-cost resources that Thrivent generally and Church Fuel here specifically wants to introduce to churches. This goes into that 5S question that we shared with you on the earlier slides, and there's a number of other really powerful and intriguing questions that go to mindset and heart set. Next up, so if mindset matters more than money, we'd also submit to everyone on the phone that mission matters more than money too. So a lot of times when we're asking, we're thinking about a specific dollar amount. And then one of the things we want to do too is anticipate, who are we talking to? Who are we talking with? So for you as a pastor, you have your own relationship with money. And you can come to understand your own relationship with money. And this is really important, because what we don't want to have happen is your own relationship with money interferes with how you talk about mission. And for a lot of you on the webinar, you might step back and think, wow, are there moments where my own relationship with money somehow created a barrier or an inhibition to how I might talk about mission? And so for yourself, that new money mindset assessment, check it out. Stepping in from there, we've done a lot of work at Thrivent in conjunction with several amazing organizations, Barna included, Church Fuel included. Barna was quite helpful in helping us find what's happening in the money relationship for a lot of pastors, and where does it show up, frankly, as an inhibition to mission or a barrier to mission. And one of the things that we know is that church planters themselves, and so these are the folks who are on the cutting edge of creating new churches for the church as a body, for the whole of the kingdom. They're spending about 21% of their time dealing with money administration, 1/5 of their time. And so we know that the keep the lights on part of everyone's job description is pretty profound, and it can be especially poignant in the context of church planting. We also know that 1 in 3 church planters have received exactly 0 training relative to their own finances. And we tend to see something similar in the context of fundraising. A lot of us might have gotten theological context, but relatively few of us have received specific training on how to request funds. I'm just letting that sink in for a second.
Yeah, I was in that, So I mean, my journey as a church planner was, a year or two into planning a church that had a lot of people and good services and all those things, feeling very ill-equipped. Kind of like I felt like I was sitting at the kids' table at Thanksgiving when talking about money and dealing with money, and just this saying finances are a top 2 or 3 thing that most concern me. Absolutely. I mean, that was my personal journey into that. And so, to some of you, I would say it's not your fault, right? I mean, you weren't adequately prepared for that. And why would you be? You got into church planning and got into pastoring to help people, not to be a professional fundraiser. And then you realize there was that 4th bullet that no one told you about. But it's so important to learn that and to have those tools and to seek out that personally first, and maybe broadening the circle out with staff and key leaders and deacons and elders, and then broadening it out to your church. So like in many other topics, it does start with us.
Yeah. And so for part of my own motivation, Michael, in writing the book is, if we go into a church and we have an incredibly compelling worship experience, definitely there were people there who had received the provision of God's gifts into them to be able to do amazing music. And there's probably some sheet music, right? And one of the challenges, I think, for a lot of our pastors is, on the one hand, we know and trust that God's provision is all around us. On the other hand, only a few of our churches give the sheet music for the giving side, for the money side. And we can see from this research that for a lot of pastors and a lot of planters out there, the lack of the sheet music can make it seem like the money matters more than the mission. And it can manifest in feelings of isolation, or it can manifest in feelings like finances is the number 1 or 2 or 3 thing. And so part of what we wanted to briefly show you on that same continuum of a feeling of surviving all the way up to a feeling of surplus, and what you're seeing on your screen right now, that's data for church planters. However, when we talk about this with pastors who might be a little bit longer in their tenure, we still tend to see some fairly recurring patterns that planters and pastors, generally speaking, tend to often, not none, but often have lower feelings of surplus than the rest of the population. And so what we don't want to have happen is your own relationship with money makes you feel like you don't have the moral authority to bring the full weight of those first 3 bullet points in your job description. You absolutely do. And this is one of the things that Michael has helped me think through this. And so, yes, on the one hand, we want to acknowledge that for a lot of pastors, there can be money opportunities, maybe also money frustrations. And mission matters more than money. But that isn't to say that your own relationship with money isn't important. It absolutely is. So what we want to do now is dive back into that pastor's job description and offer an observation that we hope will be insanely practical. And we'll find out through the texts in the chat. If you think of your job description as being grounded, if you think of giving as being primarily grounded in that fourth bullet point of keep the lights on, what we want to submit to you is that the pastor's job and how giving fits into the pastor's job is invitation into mission. Invitation into mission. And it's relatively few pastors who feel like they don't have the authority to invite people into mission. And yet we definitely understand that sometimes the relationship with money might feel like, well, maybe I don't feel like I'm going to invite people into giving. Giving via money, giving via dollars, that's one way to engage in mission. And as you know, frankly, you know better than I do, there are so many other ways to invite people into mission. And so, we can almost think about a job description for our congregants or our members or our attendees. And so whatever language you use to describe those people who step into your congregating body, we recognize there's a number of different ways to describe it. But in a way, they have a job to do too. Your job, you invite them into mission. Their job is to decide whether or not they're going to accept and join into mission. And so here's one of the things too, financial donations, when we look at the behavior of congregants, they see financial donations as but one way to join into mission. And importantly, and this is something, Michael, you can jump in and bring voice to this, but for pastors, oftentimes when, Michael, we were talking about this yesterday, pastor used the word give. What do you think is the mindset of the pastor when they say give?
Yeah, I've done that. Like when I say, hey, you stand up on Sunday and it's like, hey, I'd like to invite you to give to the church. I mean money. That's what I'm asking for. We're about to take an offering up. We need money.
Yeah.
Keep the lights on, right?
Yeah.
But when your church hears the word give, they may not think money. In fact, the younger they are, the least likely they are to associate the word give with money.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say we'd like for you to give, well, your boomers, your Gen Xers, all those people are thinking, well, I do give. I'm a volunteer. I lead a small group. I got here early to set cones up in the parking lot, and I made a casserole for somebody. And so I'm a very generous, giving person. And so for some of us, it just may mean when we're talking about financial giving, we just need to clarify and not say give. We might need to say give money if that's what we're talking about. At the same time, we may want to recognize that there's more. We say this and we believe that there's more to giving than money, but we probably need to talk about some of those other ways as well. And so even just a clarity of language, I think will help you know your role and your congregation know where they fit in that as well.
Yeah. And for pastors in those first three job descriptions, it can often feel really comfortable to give the theological context for other invitations into mission and for other events and happenings at the church. There's a theological context for a funeral, and there's a theological context for a wedding, and there's a theological context for Sunday school. So specificity of the invitation into mission, I'm inviting into mission this way for that kind of a gift or offering or tithe. And then here's the theological context. Mm-hmm. And that keeps yes, it'll serve that fourth bullet point of keeping the lights on, and it gives people the context that's in your first three parts of your job description. Right. So next up, and this tracks hopefully reasonably well, is that motivation towards missional matters. This is where we're moving in some respects from your mindset, your heart, and we're starting to unpack more of what's in the heart of your congregants or your attendees or your members. This is where context can be really powerful. And so one of the things that I'm going to pause here briefly before we dive deeper into this, part of what Michael and I wish to craft today for all of you on the webinar is that these would be approaches, practices, habits that would be applicable in all of your contexts. So you can apply this in a variety of ways. It doesn't matter what type of giving approach you have, whether it's online or not, or both. It doesn't matter which type of software you use. It doesn't matter if it's in the context of a weekly appeal, an annual appeal, a special appeal, a capital campaign. Our hope is that you can take these approaches and have them apply in multiple places. And this is a really, really powerful one of linking and labeling your financial giving efforts to what your congregants or members are already engaged in whenever possible. And here's why. What we know from broader research is that people who have already have a demonstrated missional connection and a demonstrated emotional connection have a significantly higher propensity to give financially. In fact, this was, again, another one of the motivations for writing the book is there are almost these myths, this lore in the church setting and nonprofit setting that we're like, well, we can't ask volunteers to give because they've already given. And what we see is quite the opposite, that volunteers not only have the highest propensity to give, but they're also going to have a higher propensity to give at higher financial amounts. So they'll give more and they will give more frequently. So the broad field of behavioral economics talks about this in a fairly scientific and jargony way. And I would boil it down to this, Michael. In the role of the pastor, when inviting into mission, find the positive fires that are already happening in the hearts and minds of your people and throw more fuel on that fire.
Yeah, no, that's so smart. I think it goes back to even those 4 key actions that we talked about at the beginning. And while we're focusing on them, people that volunteer are more likely to give. People that invite their friends are more likely to volunteer. People that volunteer are more likely to invite their friends. So these things, people that are growing in their faith are more likely to volunteer. So these actions really all work together. And I think there's so much wisdom on this slide, particularly that second point. Your volunteer base, you're probably not going to burn them out by asking them to give. You're going to burn them out by not pastoring and shepherding and caring for them and like doing all those other things. A simple way to just say this is those who are already in, they're in. And so it's harder to get a new giver than it is to shepherd and lead somebody who's already supporting your church in one of these ways.
And if our mindset is it's easier to shepherd somebody who's already giving, particularly if we understand that their definition of gift can be broader. So, hey, they're already giving time. Would you step in? Would you be invited into a deeper relationship with mission through money? The inverse is true too, by the way. Hey, you're already giving money. I see you as a committed giver of money, but you know what I'm not seeing? So what's the barrier? What's the hurdle? What's the opportunity? And so, yes, it definitely includes invitations through financial giving, and we can grow the depth of all giving. So what we'd encourage everybody here is link and label that act of giving funds to other acts, like you just said. Like, where does that link into evangelizing? Whatever language your church and congregating community uses for evangelizing, where does that link into outreach? Whatever language you would use for outreach, or your small groups. This is where typically more successful appeals are likely to come and grow over time. So what are you and what are your people already doing well? And how can you have more of that happen?
Yeah, I can give you guys a couple examples of that too. Even just 2 weeks ago, at the church that I attend in Atlanta, they had taken a bunch of high school kids to camp, and they had come back from camp, and they had taken, just a minute in the service to show some pictures and then to tell the broader congregation, hey, this last week we had all these high school students at camp, and they showed some pictures, and they showed some pictures of the worship service and talked for just a few minutes about some of the things they learned. And then they did this very link and label exercise, and they said, for all of you who give here at this church, thank you for giving, because we were able to send all these kids to camp because of that. And so just very tactically, one of the things, and we talk about this a lot inside of Churchfield, is whenever you receive an offering on a Sunday or at a church service, take a minute, take 30 seconds to connect the dots between one of these other things. I've seen churches that when they do baptism in the service, they'll baptize somebody, and then right after, if you've ever given or supported here, thank you so much, because you now have a part in this person's story. And that is the linking and labeling that Chris is talking about, highlighting the mission and connecting it to generosity, not just saying, we're about to have the offering, thanks for participating. That's kind of boring.
Yeah, that can be. Well, and here's a challenge too for perhaps some of you on the webinar. What happens if you're trying to raise financial giving for a what's next effort? It's definitely easier. It's literally easier. It doesn't make it easy, but it's definitely easier to raise funds around things that are already happening. And for those of you who do text in and download the Habit of Asking book, you're going to see that almost all of the stories are drawn from church planters. And so one of the recurring themes that I saw, and we saw this earlier in the research, is finances can be perceived as a pretty significant barrier for our church planters. And for a lot of our church planters, particularly when they're pre-launch, everything is a what's next effort. because it's real that the church planter's heart and soul and mind and whole of strength are committed to this effort. But sometimes there isn't even a launch team yet. And so this next little effort, this next little piece of focus here is, okay, that's great for the things we're already doing, but how do we frame this for things that we're about to do? And here's what we would share. For most of our givers, mission is way more engaging than operations. That's not true for all of them. In fact, if you download the book, you'll see that my wife and I call ourselves kind of like the plumbing and furnace type givers. We're like, we actually love the operations. It takes a certain kind of person like myself to say like, hey, you know the way I'm going to do a gift into the church? I'm going to do skills building around fundraising. So I'm an ops guy. Michael, you're an ops guy. But for most givers, honestly, they're not ops people because it's a precious few of us who find operations really exciting. And thank God for the world that we have them. For the rest of us, that's less true.
We just think all that stuff just happens. Like it just happens.
It doesn't.
It's like, I don't know, the government runs it. Or something.
Yeah, someone else will run it. So what we see is a lot of pastors can tend to overemphasize operations. They know they have the pressure of the fourth bullet point in the job description. And so a lot of the appeals are in the context of keeping the lights on. But what's not as clear in the communications is the why of those actions. The why of the actions on behalf of the who. So to get tactical, your word from just a moment ago, we'll see with a lot of pastors and especially with a lot of planters, they'll often correctly know that a lot of the early stage giving into a church will essentially be almost the equivalent to the early stage salary or compensation for the pastor. The salary of the pastor is a lights on function. Our pastors should be paid. Now, here's the thing that we can see from other organizations when they're doing missional appeals for their what's next. And this is where we can borrow from the insanely practical approach of, say, a very large nonprofit organization that's dedicated to, say, children's cancer research or leukemia and lymphoma or fill in the blank. If you dig behind the numbers, the vast majority of those funds that are raised are for what? They're for doctors, they're for researchers, they're for human beings who are drawing a salary. So most of our funds that go into essentially quote unquote program-based nonprofits that are trying to drive a positive change in the world, most of the funds will be spent on human beings, on talented human beings who deserve a respectful wage. Yet you'll very rarely see an appeal, a fundraising appeal, a gift offering, whatever language they use. You'll very rarely see an appeal saying, the Children's Cancer Research Fund is trying to raise $186,000 to hire our next researcher. That's not what they're raising the funds for. That's what they're going to use the funds for. They're going to use the funds for operations, but they're going to raise the funds to help a kid, to change the course of history, to end the scourge of disease. And so the first three parts of your job description are honestly much more compelling for most people when they're going to make a gift. So if you're a church planter and you see a need to invite a group of people into a relationship with God who right now aren't being invited into a relationship with God, that's job description bullet point number 1. For sure, most people will figure it out that, it's also going to help you pay for your rent, cover the cost of gas, and hopefully have you be fed. But for most people, it's job description bullet point number 1 is more compelling than job description bullet point number 4. And then if you happen to bump into me and my wife, Anna, and we're really motivated by job description number 4, talk all day long about the cost of your rent.
We need to know about the furnace.
We need to know about the furnace. Anything else you'd add in here?
No, I think I always think of the word story when you were talking about this, because we should be able to tell those mission stories, those success stories, those case studies of the people whose lives were changed. And it doesn't even have to be like this miraculous story, right? It doesn't have to be, the I once was blind, but now I see story. That's great. But even the steps, like just simple stories of connecting generosity back to these actions that people were taking in the church. You as a pastor care a great deal about the budget. 95% of the people in your church do not want to fund the budget. The budget is just some document. I mean, it's a document. It's an Excel document, right? It's not exciting. What they do want to fund is your children's ministry and your community outreach ministry and the people and their neighbors and, those things. So couch what maybe it's couch number 4. I think you alluded this. Number 4 bullet point, make it number 1, 2, and 3. not this own thing that has to happen off on number 4. Bring number 4 into 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, so when we're in the context of those new initiatives that also have lights, that's part of the stress test for all of you. You might be already starting or trying out something from the grow part of this webinar series from last week. As pastors, we would really encourage you and invite you to be clear and direct and missional in your communications and appeals for giving for grow. And again, if you're already growing, it's easier to throw fuel on that fire. But even if you're not growing, we can frame that in the context of your first 3 bullet points in your job description. Let's get to 4. And the 4th is that significance matters more than any one sum. And Michael, you and I have talked about this quite a bit. Oftentimes when I teach or co-teach one of our workshops or intensives on fundraising, sometimes for church planters, but oftentimes for the coach of a church planter or a more senior or longer tenured pastor, they'll sort of pull me up at the break and they'll say, yeah, that's all great for church planting, but help me through the high net worth gift. Help me through the big ask, the big money ask. And it's funny the different language that'll be used for this. And I grappled with this for a while. And I really do believe that mindset matters more than money and mission matters more than money. And so in this instance, what I want to share back with everybody is, yes, you will find yourselves talking with folks and asking for higher dollar amounts. And sometimes you're going to find yourself asking for higher time amounts. Hey, I think God's calling you to fundamentally change what you're doing and come here and work for the church. That's an explicit time ask, but for a lot of people where you're asking them to step out of business and take on a role, that's also an implicit financial ask, right? And so here's the insanely practical tip we would offer for you, that significance matters more than any one sum. And what we want you to do is understand how to differentiate between gifts of significance from more general appeals or more general asks. And then my hunch is for a lot of you on the webinar, you might have experienced something that you didn't see as significant, but somebody else did. And this is the person who said they wanted to make a $2,500 gift. They might have been really, really excited when they want to make it. For you, that's not a make or break gift for your church. And yet when they offered to do this gift, they also said, and I want you to do a 12-week sermon series on boat building to accept this gift. Now I'm purposely being a little bit hyperbolic, but there can be this mindset mismatch. Like you're thinking like, hey, this is not a lot of money and you're asking a lot out of me, all right? What you're seeing here, what you're experiencing there is someone where the significance of the gift is very, very high to them, even if the sum doesn't seem high to you. And so one of the things that we'd have you watch for in the context of gifts of significance, actually 3 things that we'd have you watch for and anticipate is first, what's your own mindset? Financial amount is definitely a factor in significance, but it's not necessarily the primary or sole factor for what makes a gift significant. So you might see a gift as significant, and the other person doesn't. Conversely, you might not see the gift as significant, and they do. So their mindset matters a lot as well. So, and watch for this. In the context of a gift of significance, often there's an expectation by the giver that they want to influence direction because of their perception, not your perception, their perception that the gift is significant. The public context for this, and we can see this all around us, is the so-and-so stadium, the such and such library, the this and that, you fill in the blank. But there are very public reflections on gifts of significance where there was such an extremely high amount of money, and then it came with naming rights. Now, notwithstanding that our gifts should be anonymous and neither fame nor fortune seek, we can absolutely see that there is a tendency from some givers to expect some form of public recognition. And so that is one way that you might see gifts of significance come up. But more often than not, and that's one way of having influence, right? I literally see the influence to change the name and the brand on the building. That's common, but less common in a church setting. But the thing that is still true is for larger gifts, from the perspective of the giver, they'll sometimes expect an opportunity to influence. Not always, but sometimes. And so we'd have you watch for that. And then this is where you can quite literally bump into some mission creep risk. And Michael, maybe jump in on this of some of the things we were talking about earlier this week.
No, I mean, this is the strings attached giving, right? So
Yeah.
so sometimes the strings, I'm trying to just to make this practical. Sometimes if the strings are on mission, it's okay.
Yeah.
Right. If it's part of your strategy, if it's part of your mission, if it's something you're going to do anyway, then just practically speaking, I mean, it's something to evaluate and go, okay, it's not going to take us off mission. What's the harm going to be? But for a lot of us, we've had, and many of us have probably had these stories where somebody wants to give and wants to influence in a way that's going to take you off of mission. And that may be, it may require some courageous conversations. It may require some kind of recentering or refocus of people. That is probably always going to happen in the context of a relationship and a conversation, not an announcement or something that you print and send out, right? And so this is where we put the pastor hat on, and we have to kind of guide and shepherd people to go, hey, here's what's not for sale. Like this is part of our church. It's really not for sale, but here's where you can get involved, because what I'm seeing, behind what you're asking, behind the gift or the heart maybe behind your asking, is you want to influence and push this particular thing forward. Well, we have a mechanism for that to happen. And so it's really just that tough balance, I think.
Yeah. And we'll sometimes see this in the after effects as well. So the member of the trusteeship or board or governing council or eldership, different churches will use different names and phrases, but the person who quit with indignity and said, I'm not giving anymore because I'm upset about blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
That can happen too. And so what we can see is gifts of significance when the person is seeking to influence as well. To your point, Michael, if it's on mission, well, fantastic. Well, what happens if it's off mission? For you, we'd encourage you to be careful, watch for mission creep. And to your point about the pastor's role, this person might be giving you an indirect signal that there's an opportunity for discipleship, right? Okay, great. I can see you're frustrated, or I can see you're excited, or I can see you have these expectations. Let's talk those through. We talk about this a bit more in the Habit of Asking book, because in addition, for me personally, in addition to helping the church see that there is sheet music for financial gifts, financial requests, and there's a discipleship context for virtually every gift. Virtually every gift. I'm hard pressed to think of a financial giving scenario where there isn't a direct or indirect discipleship implication too, and they will often come up in the context of these gifts of significance. Third up, a lot of times for pastors, particularly pastors who feel the crunch and punch of keeping the lights on, usually your mindset is, when I'm making the request, and even if it's in the context of a big ask, I'm still thinking hard dollars. I'm still thinking a dollar sign in a check or a credit card or hard cash. There's a fair chunk of times where a gift of significance will actually come back in a different form, a different type of asset. And I've seen this, and this is one of the ways the Holy Spirit can work in such incredibly cool and powerful ways. I've quite literally seen church planners who made an ask for funding so that they could someday, hopefully one day, secure a place where they could meet. And an agnostic coffee shop owner handed over the keys and said, hey, our coffee shop is closed Wednesday nights and Sunday nights. Why don't you use it? And so that's a pretty significant ask from the planter. The assumption of the planter was, I'm going to get money. And like, holy cow, right? In a good way. What they got was a set of keys so that they could start meeting immediately. And so those kinds of gifts of different and differentiated assets happen. Whole buildings, stock, life insurance proceeds, the willingness to step in and do a long-term. These types of moments can sometimes take you by surprise when you're asking for gifts of significance. And there are, you can get equipped for this. There are skills around this. And there's a small ecosystem that serves into the church and the parachurch and ministry world that can help you through gifts of significance. So we're not going to give you the laundry list of those here on the webinar, but Thrivent has a close relationship with two amazing community foundations, In Faith and National Christian Foundation. And both of those foundations are a great example of organizations that can work with you or can work with any church with a complex, non-cash based gift And there are others as well. For some of you who are a part of denominational bodies, oftentimes denominational bodies will have a function in the middle adjudicatory to help you out with that.
Now, the last thing I would just add on that is that may be a much bigger opportunity than you realize, particularly moving forward. I think for some of you, it's more likely that you get a gift of significance that is a non-cash gift of significance than just a really big check. And if we're not thinking that way or prepared for that, I mean, we may miss it, or may sometimes we can see. Sometimes people, we know how much money they have by how they live their life, but more often than not, you have no idea what people own and have inherited, and what kind of investments they have, and they're more than willing to kind of do some of those legacy kind of things if presented that opportunity.
Yeah, and this next slide, and there's a lot going on in this slide, and
it's very colorful.
It's very colorful,
like it.
and Barna helped us with the research that backs up this slide. But for a lot of you on the webinar, my hunch is somewhere getting middle toward the end, you're hoping that every one of those gifts, every one of those financial asks is because somebody preciously and generously wants to serve God with their money. And so when we look at pastors overrepresent for serving God with my money. That shouldn't be a shocker to any of us, that through their gifts, they hope that they're serving God. Through their time, they hope that they're serving God. And here's the bummer. Comes up a little lower on the list for other folks, and these are folks who self-identify as Christian and have a very high likelihood of practicing in their faith. That could be church attendance, reading the Bible, daily prayer, or more. And so this isn't just any old American. This is American Christians who are practicing their faith on this slide. Their number one use for their funding, and they see it as their funding, is providing for my family. Now, a lot of times in the context of gifts of significance, for you on the webinar, you might be seeing a legacy opportunity for the church. We see that establishing a financial legacy in some way is a motivator for between 6 to 7%, 8% of the US population who are Christian. That's not a lot. That's some. You got a 1 in 12, 1 in 14 likelihood that your interest in a financial legacy matches up with their interest. But what you can see here is that there's a range of motivations for any type of gift. And those motivations can show up in the context of mission. But again, mission matters more than money. Mindset matters quite a bit. The reason you're asking for the gift of significance may or may not be the same reason that they would be willing to step in and provide a gift of significance. And here's the beautiful thing about God's provision. There's an abundance of motivations that we see on this slide about why people want to make decisions with their money. And Michael, you pointed out another thing too to me yesterday where I had seen this data many, many, many times, and it's been hidden in plain sight. And like when we talk about what we talk about in church the most from this slide.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the money series that you see preached, and we've all preached, and even kind of what's popular in Christendom about finances, if you look at the slide, it's the third up from the bottom is be debt free. And when you look at this, I mean, 6% of all Christians are saying, hey, our ultimate goal is to be debt free. But so much of our teaching in church is all around be debt free, be debt free, be debt. And that's not a bad message. I mean, that's a very good message. What this slide is showing is that may not be people's ultimate motivator. How much content in our sermon series is around provide for my family? And challenging the lifestyle and what kind of lifestyle. So when you look at what people's goals are and their approach to money is, right? This even gets into what some of their mindset might be. Are we really truly equipping people financially in all the areas that they're identifying, or are we just focusing our money messages on get out of debt? And so I think this slide provides some color commentary in a lot of different colors on that.
And it's definitely an and.
It's an and, I mean, absolutely.
As a person who's long worked with Thrivent, you're never going to hear me say,
just
go ahead.
Right, it's not bad, right? That should definitely be a component of what we teach, but I don't know it's not the only component,
yeah.
Right?
So, for most of your givers, when they're asked to give a gift of significance, we'd encourage you to have that appeal not only have a missional connection, but anticipate an invitation for the giver to influence. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you should accept the invitation to influence, to Michael's caution, But in a very real sense, this can be, and it often is best as a deeper invitation to mission. But we can miss it, and we can miss it a lot. So gifts of significance, your mindset, their mindset, and prepare yourself for a variety of possible responses and gift types, and anticipate ways to invite more deeply. Number 5, and this is our last insanely practical tip, and this one is so easy, it's so powerful, and it's so
Like a caveman can do it.
it's a caveman can do it, right?
It's commercial.
And it's so often missed, and it's gratitude matters a lot. Gratitude matters a lot. And this might seem so obvious that it's painful, but it's also quite practical. And here's why. So for a long time, a lot of our churches either got no training or they had sort of indirect training. And giving, in whatever language it was described, in whatever context it was discussed, it would often be seen as duty-based. And so in some ways, a lot of congregants and their leaders either don't have a practice or possibly fell out of the practice of saying thank you. And it doesn't mean that duty-based giving is wrong, but it can mean that thank yous are also right. And gratitude has a really powerful impact. For instance, on the 5S slides, from a feeling of subsistence all the way up to surplus that you saw earlier in the slides, a habit of gratitude, a practice of thankfulness has been shown that it's a quite powerful way to help move people up toward broader feelings of surplus, broader feelings of stability and security. And when people practice gratitude, and as their mindset and heart set moves toward a feeling of abundance or a feeling of surplus, we then see greater financial gifts. We then tend to see greater volunteerism. And so what we see is, when you look across, research shows that when you look across organizations that cultivate and have a habit and practice of gratitude, they see increased giving in 2 ways, both in terms of persistency. So fewer of your current givers will become lapsed donors. I don't really like the word lapsed donor, but it's sort of an industry term, if you will. What I hate worse, by the way, is in the church, we sometimes call our people giving units.
Giving units.
That one drives me even crazy.
Like you're a robot.
Yeah, like you're a robot, and your only purpose here is to be a unit of giving. But we'll see an increased persistency. Fewer people become lapsed donors. And in terms of amount, givers who are thanked are much more likely to increase their financial gifts and to increase their volunteerism over time. And so our last insanely practical message here, before we pause and see if we've had some chat questions come in, is if you say thank you today, we truly believe, and we would have you watch as your givers re-engage in all of your tomorrows. And by the way, this is not a get donations quick scheme.
Right.
This is very much a cultivated, powerful, abundant practice for churches, and really for any institution. And my firm belief is that, and my hope is that this would fit into the theological context for all of our churches.
Yeah, I think, the temptation is to, not let somebody's reward in heaven, I almost kind of hate that phrase, your rewards in heaven, can be an excuse to not thank people on earth. It's like, they know their rewards in heaven. We know their rewards in heaven, but a thank you goes a long way. And so thank you note, a handwritten note, a thank you email, a thank you text. There's so many practical ways to do that. And it's not hard. Like, you could literally do that today, just print off a list of people that have given recently, or maybe for the first time, or consistently over the years. And I don't know if I can think of a whole lot better use of time than writing 3 or 4 thank you notes to those people.
And the insanely practical tip here, Michael, is when you write the thank you note, it's just a thank you note. It's not thank you and would you give again.
Right. And here's a series of envelopes that are pre-stamped.
Now you can do the series of envelopes pre-stamped later.
Right.
But
say thanks just to say
just
thanks.
Try to say thanks and see how it feels.
Yeah.
Usually feels good for the giver and the receiver of the gratitude.
That's good. That's so good. So I'm going to put we're going to do some questions now, guys. We'll stick around for a few minutes. So if you've got questions, if you want to just type them in the chat, we'll see them and try to answer a few of them. And we'll see some that are coming up. I want to put one slide back up while we're doing some of the questions. And it's this slide here in case you missed it earlier. If you will text the word give to that phone number, 678-506-2850. If you'll text the word give to that number, we'll have a little quick conversation. And we will send you Chris's book, which is the covers on the screen here, Habit of Asking. It's got a lot of these concepts that we talked about today, the slides from today, the replay link from today, the notes from today, and all that stuff. So you'll get that as well if you just text that in. So maybe there's a part of it that you wanted to share with a board member, or it'll just be yours to just kind of rewatch again. So let's. I'm going to go through some of these questions, Chris, and I'll quarterback them out to you and let you chime in on them if that's okay.
Sure.
So if you guys have questions, we'll take 5 or 10 minutes and just do some. David said you referenced 5S a few times. What is the 5S?
So that's a great question, David. So earlier in the slides, you would have seen 5 different S's. So
that's really good, helpful.
Yep.
The 5 S's.
I'm going.
Okay.
I'm going. So, and they go to mindset. So is my feeling about my relationship with money that I'm constantly in subsistence? The feeling might be living paycheck to paycheck. And a lot of people feel like they're just surviving or struggling, and they might have more than just one paycheck, but that might be how they feel. Conversely, all the way up at the outer edge of the 5S is this notion of surplus. I feel like I have enough, so much so that I can also share. And so people who feel like they have enough, so much so that they can share, have a higher likelihood of giving. And it's not based upon how much money they have. That's why we put up those slides. This is not a dollar amount. This is not a dollar amount. This is a mindset and a heart set. And so sometimes this can help pastors explain an enigma, right? It's Mother Teresa type figures. Mm-hmm. Pretty remarkable. On the one hand, she took a daily vow of poverty and trusted in God's provision. On the other hand, she was definitely in a state of surplus, giving the whole of her time and the whole of her life in service. And so this is where you can see on the far left extreme, practically, she was literally in poverty. On the far right, she was absolutely living in a mindset of surplus. Now, most of us aren't Mother Teresa, and that's a pretty tough standard. But what we can see is that the practical attributes of how much money I have lower correlation to financial giving and lower correlation to gifts of time. Whereas what my heart's telling me, how I feel about money, and how I feel has a much higher correlation. So that's what 5S is. It's a question that leads to an insight, and that insight helps us understand what's the heart of my congregant, what's my own heart. Yeah. And that's where in the quote unquote New Money Mindset book and link, the 5S question is embedded there, and it helps unpack for you, and it can help unpack for members of your church.
Like, that is a great book. I definitely recommend that because it's unpacked in there. You can just go to Amazon and search for your money mindset, or there was a link earlier that we showed where to grab it. Kim asked, how long does it take to change the culture of giving in a church? Because this doesn't seem like it's a quick fix.
Yeah, I would say it takes a single step and it takes an entire lifetime. So the power of thank you is profound. And Michael, you said, like, I can't imagine that it would be a bad use of time to print off a list and start saying thank you. So we can quite literally see remarkable change very quickly through discipleship and through our own practices. So I would say that's the heart space. Practicing gratitude can have a pretty profound change pretty quickly. Yeah. It's not a get-rich-quick scheme and shouldn't be thought of as one. And by the way, again, the very insanely practical title of the book, The Habit of Asking. For a lot of churches, we see that they don't ask.
Yeah, just ask.
They just don't invite into mission almost at all. It's almost like it's an open secret. And don't have it be a secret. So churches that shift and nonprofits that shift from not asking to asking can see a pretty significant lift in many of those 4 metrics. You know, if you wonder why people aren't engaged in inviting others into church, well, ask them to, and hopefully be presently surprised that they will. Same with gifts of funds.
That's good. I'll answer a couple of these really quickly. Scott asked, could you share those 4 job descriptions of a pastor again? Because I missed that slide. If you'll text that number in, and this is for everybody, we'll send you this whole slide deck. So you'll have a PDF of all these slides, and you can come back to them. Dan asked, if most mission giving instead of operation giving is done through special offerings, how do you engage people in regular giving? Is that a culture change that needs to happen? I'll answer that real quick, and then Chris, I'd be curious of your perspective too. this is not your question, Dan, but I want to back up and say this. I would not separate out explicitly all the time mission giving and operation giving. I would be very careful in my language to make sure that people understand the operations of the church is also the mission giving, so that when they're funding the staff is doing the ministry, and they're leading the ministry and working with the people, and the output of the story output is connected. And so, you don't have to have a special offering for the light bill and a special offering for the, all the different operations of a church. However, I think the question that you're asking is the relation of special offering and regular giving, the culture change. And so if all of the mission kind of stuff giving happens through special offering, like, hey, we want to serve this school, and so we're having a special offering, and the only way we're going to serve this school is through this special offering, I do think there's going to be a gap that comes up in that church, and it's almost going to be like an addiction that has to happen. Like, the only way we can get the real stuff done is through a special offering. And so I'd be careful of that. What would you chime in on that?
Yeah, and there's a risk that I'm over referencing back to the book, but if you do text in and download the book, there's a section of the book where we talk about context, ritual, and giving practices. So each church will have a ritual for giving. They might have more than one ritual. They'll have a context for the giving, and then there'll be a theology for the giving. And so I would encourage each of you as pastors is, what is your church's ritual? You might need to develop one. If you have a ritual, do people understand its context? And if people have the ritual in context, are you describing it in your theology? The reason that's important is because a fair chunk of time, pastors will come to me and say, well, we've got a box at the back of the church. Is it better to do online giving? It's not necessarily that one practice is better than the other, because if the box in the back of the church is the ritual, people understand the context and they know the theology, you can see a very robust giving practice for a little tiny box placed at the back of the church. On the flip side, you could have the most robust digital environment and nobody participates in it because they don't understand the context, they don't see it as a ritual, and they don't have the theology. Yep. What we tend to find is that churches usually will adapt to the different giving styles of their congregants. So some folks might want to give at the back of the box because that's what they've been doing for 35 years. But other folks don't even bring a checkbook with them. They're only going to give via text. Yeah. So we are seeing that context matters, and a lot of churches are adapting. But we need to be careful not to overassume that this is the one practice that's true for all churches. That can't be true, because theology is important.
And there are probably multiple tools and practices that we need to have kind of in our arsenal. There's old school ways of giving, there's new school ways of giving, and just because your church is full of young people doesn't mean some of the old school ways won't work, and vice versa. So a lot of tools can be helpful there. Maybe we'll come back and do some more training on tools and tactics and strategies and some of those things. So I want to remind you one last time before we go, if you will text the word give to this phone number at 678-506-2850. And full disclosure, that's a fully automated system. So when you text that word in, you'll get an automatic reply that asks for an email address. And then when you type in the email address, you will automatically get these things. It's just the easiest way to do that, because a lot of people are not necessarily listening from their computer where they can email, and texting's easier. So you'll get the PDF of this book, the slides from today, the replay link to today. All of those things we'll just send you right away. As promised, there's absolutely zero things for sale. All I would ask for you, if I could ask one thing, is if this has been helpful, if there is a topic that you would like to us to go further on or explain, we'd love to hear your feedback. And so you can email me personally at michael@churchfield.com and share any feedback. If there's something that we talked about, it's like, hey, I really want to know more about this, or this was really helpful. If something was particularly unhelpful, we'd love to hear that as well. And so we're not asking you to sign up for anything or buy anything today, but I would crave and welcome any feedback that you have. So again, thanks for being here, carving out time. Chris, thank you, man. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody on the webinar. We do this work because we care so passionately about the work that you do. And in many respects, our mission is so that you can be on mission. So thank you.
All right. We're here for you if you need us. Otherwise, we are signing off, and hope you have a great rest of the week and a great weekend. God bless.